A poor black girl was splashed by a rich, arrogant heiress. That moment changed her life forever. She was poor, she was black, she was invisible, until one rich woman's cruelty made the world stop and look. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She rose. This isn't just another sad story. This is war between pride and humility, between power and quiet strength. And someone was watching, someone who could change everything. If you think kindness is weakness, think again. If you think people like her stay at the bottom, you're not ready for what comes next. Keep watching. This is the story they never saw coming. It was one of those mornings where the sky held its breath, gray, unmoving, heavy with a silence only a city after rain can carry. Puddles lay like forgotten mirrors across the cracked sidewalks of Crownville, and every surface seemed to glisten under a muted silver sky. Emma Davis stood at the curb, her coat buttoned to the neck, her fingers clutching a paper bag that held a single biscuit and a packet of tea. She wasn't late, not yet, but she walked fast. Not just to be on time for her cleaning shift, but because in this city, every step you take as a young black woman from the other side of town must count for something. Her shoes, once white, had dulled to a weary beige. The soles flapped slightly at the heel. Her uniform, folded with care each night, still carried the scent of lemon disinfectant. Her gloves were tucked in her pocket, threadbare, but still intact. She didn't see the SUV until it was too late. A sleek white machine roared down the road like it on the morning. The tires sliced through a deep puddle. A wall of dirty water erupted, shooting up and out like a wave. Emma didn't scream. She flinched, turned her face, but the water found her anyway, her coat, her skirt, her bag, her face. A cold, sudden baptism of disrespect. The SUV didn't stop. Its tinted window rolled down just enough to show a pair of oversized sunglasses and blood-red lips. "Watch where you stand next time," the woman's voice said, sharp, cruel, the kind of voice that bites through skin and pride alike. Then she laughed, just a chuckle. A rich woman's laugh, empty and self-satisfied. The SUV sped off, leaving Emma standing there, dripping, humiliated, and alone. But she wasn't alone. Across the street, behind the glare of a black sedan, a man had been watching, not out of boredom but intent. His name was Ethan Cole, and in that moment he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't the CEO of Cole Estates. He was just a black man who had seen something too familiar. Something that looked like his own mother, 25 years ago, cleaning hotel rooms so her son could dream. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Instead, he reached for his phone. "Find out who she is," he said. "Everything." Emma didn't cry. She walked the rest of the way with squishing shoes and cold legs, clutching the soaked paper bag that now bled grease through her fingers. By the time she reached the service entrance of Crownville Towers, she looked like someone who had survived a storm. Her supervisor met her at the door. Mr. Clark, a man with a clipboard and no patience. "You're late." There was a car. I got splashed." "No excuses. This place has to shine before the guests walk in. Get to work." She nodded, eyes to the floor. Shame is quiet. In the locker room, no one looked up. A few coworkers glanced her way, then turned back to folding towels, brushing hair, checking phones. Emma peeled off her wet coat, changed into an old backup uniform with a missing button, tied her hair into a tight bun, and stepped into the hallway with a mop in hand. The marble floors of Crownville Towers stretched long and wide. They sparkled under chandeliers that cost more than her monthly rent. Emma's mop glided back and forth like clockwork. Her knees ached. Her back throbbed. But her mind wandered to a small apartment with peeling wallpaper and a girl still sleeping under 2 blankets. Olivia. Her sister was the reason she kept going. She whispered under her breath, a prayer she'd learned from her mother. A prayer for strength, for patience, for another day of survival. Across town, Ethan sat in his office watching the city from behind glass. The file had arrived. Emma Davis, 23, 2 jobs, lives in West Pine. Lost her mother 2 years ago, guardian to her sister, age 8. He tapped the photo attached, a quiet smile on Emma's face, one arm wrapped around Olivia. The kind of photo taken when money is tight but love is deep. She didn't deserve that, Ethan said quietly. His assistant raised a brow. Do you want me to do something? Not yet, Ethan replied. Let's see how she moves through the world. Vanessa Johnson adjusted her gold necklace as her stylist fussed with her jacket. Her luxury penthouse was bathed in natural light, and her voice was full of laughter. She should be grateful I didn't run over her toes, Vanessa said, sipping a green smoothie. Her assistant forced a smile. Vanessa didn't remember Emma's face, only that she was in the way, but something else was watching. And this time the story wasn't going to be so simple. By noon, Emma slipped outside to eat. She sat on a crate behind the hotel, unwrapping a stale sandwich from a piece of napkin. Her hands trembled. Then a man passed by the alley. He paused. Wearing a cap pulled low and sunglasses, Ethan glanced at her, pretending to check his phone. But what he saw made his heart tighten. A girl eating in silence, her fingers shaking, her face still smudged with dried mud, her eyes scanning for missed messages. He saw her, and he remembered his mother's hands, cracked from bleach and water, steady even when the world was not. He walked away, but in his mind something had taken root. She doesn't know it yet, he whispered, but her story's already changing. The next morning the sky wore a softer shade. Emma tied Olivia's shoelaces at the edge of their small bed, her fingers moving fast but gentle. Be good at school, okay, baby? Olivia nodded and grinned, hugging her tightly. Oh, you too, Emmy. On the bus ride to work, Emma kept her eyes closed and prayed again. Not for miracles, just for peace. At Crownville, something was different. Her locker door was slightly ajar. Inside was a brown paper bag. She hesitated before reaching for it. A pair of new cleaning gloves, a warm sandwich, and a folded note. The handwriting was sharp and steady. For the girl who works with grace even when the world is unkind. Emma stood frozen. She turned to check if anyone was watching, but the room was empty. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the sandwich. It was still warm. She hadn't had a hot breakfast in weeks. She pressed the note to her chest. Somewhere far above, in an office lined with glass, Ethan watched the camera feed. He saw her reaction, the surprise, the moment her eyes lit up. Small steps, he said under his breath. Down in the lobby, Emma worked with her usual quiet focus. But something inside her had shifted. She didn't feel invisible anymore. At least not completely. That evening, Ethan sat alone with a document open on his desk. Her file again, he added something in the margins, recommended for promotion. His phone buzzed. Vanessa was on a talk show bragging about her latest designer bag. The screen muted. Ethan didn't care for glitz. He looked back at Emma's photo, quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The next day, Mr. Clark called her over as she was mopping the east corridor. Emma Davis, he said, looking at a clipboard. You've been reassigned. VIP floor, better pay. She blinked. Sir, I never applied. It's been approved, he cut in. Congratulations. She walked away slowly. Behind her, whispers started. VIP her. Must be sleeping with someone. Must know somebody. She heard it all, but she didn't stop smiling. That night at home, she told Olivia, her sister threw her arms around her. See, I told you good things happen. The VIP floor smelled like lavender and leather. The walls gleamed. The guests wore designer shoes that cost more than her rent. Emma moved quietly, respectfully. She polished brass. She vacuumed carpets. She worked with her chin up. A man sat reading a paper in a lounge chair. He wore sunglasses and a quiet smile. Emma nodded politely and kept working. The man lowered his paper. "Excuse me, miss, do you know where the Sky Lounge is?" She paused. "Yes, sir, I'll walk you there." As they walked, he asked how long she'd worked there. "Almost 2 years," she replied. "It's been tough, but it pays the bills." "Do you enjoy it?" She smiled faintly. "I don't think anyone dreams of mopping floors, but I try to do my best." "You do more than that," he said gently. "You shine." She laughed softly. "Thanks, I think." He didn't tell her who he was. He just watched her walk away, still smiling. That night, Emma found another note in her locker. "Keep shining. The world sees you even if people pretend not to." And on her way out, for just a moment, she paused and looked up. Maybe the world wasn't entirely blind after all. The elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. Emma stepped onto the VIP floor with a sense of cautious awe. The air smelled different up here, like polished oak, citrus oil, and money. The silence was deeper, too, like everything had been softened just for the comfort of those who didn't want to be reminded that struggle even existed. She gripped her cart and walked with careful grace. Not too fast, not too slow. Just steady as always. Her shoes, though newly cleaned, still squeaked a little with each step, as if to remind the floor she didn't belong. But Emma walked anyway, past rooms with doors heavier than the ones in her apartment building, past velvet walls and gold-trimmed mirrors, past people who barely looked at her except one. Ethan was there again. He sat in the corner of the lounge, reading. Same sunglasses, same calm presence. But this time he wasn't pretending not to notice her. "Miss Davis," he said, standing up when she entered. Emma froze slightly. "Sir." He smiled. "I requested you for this area today. I figured if anyone could make this place feel like home, it'd be you." She blinked. "That's kind of you, but I'm just here to clean." "You're here because you do more than clean. You leave light behind." Emma gave a soft, shy smile. She didn't know what to say to that. Ethan gestured to the small table near the window. "No cleaning needed. I just wanted to say thank you for the way you carry yourself. It's rare." "I don't do anything special," she whispered. "You do," he replied. "You keep showing up with dignity in a world that tries to strip it from people like us every day." Emma looked away, swallowing hard. No one had ever said it like that. So plain, so true. Later that afternoon, back in the staff lounge, the air had changed. Tina, a senior cleaner who had worked there for 6 years, slammed a mop into the bucket harder than necessary. Her eyes flicked toward Emma. "She just got here and already she's on the VIP floor. That's what being young and pretty gets you now." Another staffer laughed nervously. "Maybe she's got friends in high places." Emma didn't speak. She stood near her locker, folding her spare uniform. Her hands were steady, but her heart was not. She knew that tone, that edge. It was the kind of bitterness born not from her, but from how the world had failed so many like Tina, too. But it still stung. She found another note tucked behind the folded towels. It simply read, "Your light threatens those who live in shadow. Keep shining." She tucked it in her pocket and exhaled slowly. That evening, Ethan sat in his office reviewing hotel operations. His assistant leaned in. "You're being noticed, sir." Ethan glanced up, noticed how. By the staff and by Vanessa, she called twice today. He leaned back. Let her wonder. Some people only learn when they're forced to look past themselves. Back at the hotel, a soft trap had been set. Tina, still seething with quiet envy, walked into the supply room late that night. She swapped Emma's cleaning solution with another, something slicker, something meant to sabotage. The next morning, a hotel guest slipped near the grand lobby. A man in an expensive suit hit the marble floor with a sharp thud. Gasps echoed through the space. Managers rushed forward. Who cleaned this floor last? Heads turned. Emma Davis, someone said quietly. Emma was called into the office. Mr. Clark stared at her over folded arms. We're investigating a safety breach. The guest could have been seriously hurt. I swear I didn't use anything wrong, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was your station, he replied, unmoved. But That's enough. Emma left the office with her eyes stinging but dry. She walked back to the locker room, hands shaking. Her body felt heavier than usual, like disappointment had found weight in her spine. But Ethan had already called security. Pull the camera footage from the supply room, he instructed. An hour later, the truth was undeniable. Tina was caught on video, caught unscrewing caps and switching bottles. The manager apologized. You're cleared. I'm sorry for the assumption. Emma nodded. She didn't smile. She simply said, "Thank you," and walked away. Later, she sat behind the hotel near the same crate as before, the same worn sandwich in her hand. Her body hunched forward, not in weakness but exhaustion, the kind that comes when you survive a fire only to see the smoke return. Ethan found her there. He approached slowly. "Mind if I sit?" She didn't answer, but she didn't say no. He sat beside her. "I saw the footage. You were set up." "I figured," she said, "but knowing and proving are two different things." He looked at her for a long moment. People don't like to see someone rise when they've been crawling too long. Emma turned to face him. Then maybe they should look in the mirror and ask why they're still crawling. He smiled, not with amusement but admiration. "Exactly." She looked out at the horizon beyond the rooftops. "I didn't ask for any of this. I just want to work, pay rent, take care of my sister." "You shouldn't have to explain your existence," Ethan said softly. "And you won't have to much longer." Emma turned to him, her eyes searching. "Why are you doing this?" He held her gaze. "Because someone once did it for me. Because I see what this world tries not to see. And because the mud they throw at us. It only makes the roots stronger." They sat in silence, not needing more words. The city buzzed somewhere behind them, but here, in the stillness, something else was blooming. A new kind of story was being written. One where a black woman wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to rise. Vanessa Johnson stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her penthouse suite, running her fingers along the edge of her pearl-studded jacket. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows, casting golden streaks across the marble floor. Her phone buzzed again, the same notification, a photo, blurry but unmistakable, her white SUV, the splash, the girl. She stared at the image for a long time, her fingers frozen mid-motion. There was a sticky note attached. The handwriting was neat. Not everyone forgets. Vanessa tore the photo in half, then in quarters. She dropped the pieces into her trash bin like they were poison. But no matter how many times she blinked, she still saw it in her mind. The mud, the girl's face, the silence that followed. She turned sharply to her assistant. "Who's sending this garbage?" Casey shifted nervously. "We don't know yet, but it's starting to circulate." "Circulate where?" Social media. Blogs, there's a thread online. People are connecting the dots." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "So now I'm the villain because some cleaner got wet." Casey didn't respond. She just lowered her eyes. At Crownville Towers, the atmosphere was shifting. Emma moved through the hotel like a breeze, quiet, unnoticed by most, but leaving behind a trace of freshness. The stain of accusation had been scrubbed clean, not just by video evidence, but by the quiet respect of those who had watched and waited. Mr. Clark now nodded when she passed. The concierge smiled. Even the head chef started offering her a warm roll every afternoon. But not everyone clapped. In the shadows, resentment simmered. Tina returned to work after her suspension. Her eyes were darker, her tone clipped. She didn't speak to Emma, just stared at her like she was something unnatural, something that didn't deserve to grow. One morning, Emma arrived to find her cleaning cart missing. When she asked the supply clerk, he shrugged. Didn't see it. Later, she found it parked near the loading dock, wheels locked and gloves soaked in vinegar. Still, she said nothing. She didn't report it. She simply cleaned the gloves, unlocked the wheels, and got back to work. That same evening, Ethan requested Emma to clean the private lounge. She arrived to find him sitting on the sofa, no sunglasses this time. Just a man waiting. "Good evening, Miss Davis." "Hello again," she replied, half smiling. "Please," he gestured toward the chair across from him, "no mop tonight, just a conversation." She hesitated, then sat. "I looked into your file again," he said. "I know about your late nights, the second job, the care for your sister. That takes strength." Emma clasped her hands together. "It's what needs to be done." "If you could choose," he asked gently, "what would you want for yourself?" She looked out the window. "I used to dream of studying hospitality, becoming a manager, running a place like this. But that kind of future is for people who can afford it." He nodded slowly. "Would you go if you had the chance?" Emma looked at him carefully. "Are you offering that chance?" "I'm offering a door. Whether you walk through it is up to you." The following morning, Vanessa stood outside her father's office in a towering building downtown. She entered without knocking. "I want to talk about Ethan," she said. Her father, a silver-haired real estate tycoon, didn't look up from his papers. "What about him?" "He's getting too involved with some hotel worker. It's making headlines. I'm being dragged into it." He finally looked up, calm but firm. "Vanessa, maybe what's happening isn't about you for once." She blinked. "Excuse me." He folded his hands. "I saw the footage. I saw the girl. What you did was cruel. You just didn't think anyone important was watching." Vanessa's voice rose. "I didn't do anything illegal." "No, just inhumane." She stared at him, stunned. "Maybe it's time you asked yourself why the world's turning on you," he continued. "Maybe it's holding up a mirror." Back at the hotel, Emma entered her locker room and found a thin envelope with her name on it. Inside was a formal letter. A scholarship offer, full tuition, hospitality management certification. Part-time job option retained. Her fingers trembled. She sat down slowly, read it again, then a third time. Mr. Clark approached her in the hallway hours later. "You're being recommended by someone very high up," he said. "I didn't apply," she replied, still dazed. "Sometimes good things don't wait for permission." That night, Ethan met her on the rooftop garden, a place the staff rarely visited. The city stretched behind them, lit like a sea of stars. Emma stood in the wind, holding the scholarship letter against her chest. "Is this real?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said, "because you've earned it." She turned to him. "People are going to talk." "Let them," Ethan replied. "You shine too bright for whispers to dim you." Below them, in a cold room with silk curtains and glass walls, Vanessa stared at her screen. Emma's name was trending, the story of the cleaner rising. Of the woman she had splashed now becoming a name of admiration. She threw her tablet across the floor. "This isn't over," she hissed. But deep down she felt the truth. Something inside her life was cracking. And unlike Emma's rise, hers was built on masks, ones that were now slipping fast. And for the first time in years, Vanessa felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The morning sun broke over Crownville like gold poured over concrete. Emma walked down the sidewalk in her freshly cleaned shoes. the city's wind brushing against her face like a quiet reminder. You're not who you were yesterday. Her fingers held tight to her shoulder bag, and inside it, folded 3 times over, was the scholarship letter that still didn't feel real. As she entered the hotel, there was a pause, subtle but sharp. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Some smiled, others didn't. She passed the front desk. The concierge nodded. "Congratulations, Miss Davis." She nodded politely. "Thank you." From the far end of the lobby, Tina watched. Her jaw-tight, arms crossed, eyes narrow with something colder than jealousy, fear disguised as pride. A woman like Emma, she thought, wasn't supposed to rise, not like this. Not so fast, not without asking. Later that afternoon, Emma was called into the Flower Lounge, a rarely used room reserved for the hotel's most elite guests. She stepped in carefully, her eyes adjusting to the soft, filtered light, the quiet hum of instrumental jazz playing overhead. Ethan stood near the far window holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You remembered," she said softly. He smiled, handing her one. "I remember everything about you." They sat by the large window, the city stretching beyond them in silver and glass. Emma leaned back in the chair, her body still but her heart quietly racing. "You gave me something I stopped believing in," she said. "What's that?" "Being seen for more than just what I do, for who I am." He looked at her deeply. "You've always been seen. It's the world that refused to open its eyes." That evening, Vanessa stood in the corner of a photography studio. Makeup lights glowing around her, stylists brushing her hair into perfection. But her eyes were locked on her phone. A blog post had gone viral overnight. From mud to merit, the cleaner who inspired a city. Her name was front and center. A photo of the SUV, a shot of Emma with her scholarship letter. Hundreds of thousands of views, thousands of comments. This is what grace under fire looks like. She's what the world needs. Vanessa should apologize. Vanessa's hand clenched the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. "Casey," she snapped, "who liked this?" Casey didn't answer, her silence said enough. Vanessa's voice turned low. "Fine, if they want drama, I'll give them drama." That night, a gossip blog published a shadowy article with the headline, "Is the Hotel Cinderella just playing rich? Sources say she's climbing fast for all the wrong reasons." Photos were posted. One of Emma and Ethan near the lounge window. One of Emma walking out of the building late at night. The implication was clear. Emma saw the post the next morning while riding the bus. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart began pounding. At work, eyes followed her more than usual, some with warmth, others with suspicion. She could hear whispers floating just behind her. She planned it all. She's working her way up through him. A classic gold digger move. By lunch, she couldn't eat. She sat alone in the back stairwell, her head in her hands. When Ethan found out, he didn't wait. He called for a press conference. Reporters lined the lobby as he stood before them, tall and calm, with Emma's name on his lips. "Emma Davis is not what you call her," he said. "She is not a climber. She's a woman who's carried burdens most of you couldn't lift. She didn't ask for help. She never once demanded attention. And yet she has earned everything coming her way. Anyone who believes otherwise should question what they value, money or character." A silence fell across the crowd. Cameras snapped. Flashbulbs popped. Later that night, Emma sat in her apartment staring at the television as Ethan's words replayed. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a delivery man holding a single rose and a small card. She opened the envelope. "Let them whisper. I'll speak your truth always." Her knees gave slightly. She sat down slowly, clutching the rose, her heart full, her voice gone. At work the next day, the staff began to change. Tina kept her distance. Mr. Clark offered her a warm nod. The head chef asked her opinion on floral centerpieces. And for the first time, Emma was asked to join the management briefing. She didn't say much, just listened. But when she spoke, the room hushed. At the edge of that room, Vanessa stood uninvited, watching from the glass corridor, arms crossed. The sound of Emma's voice echoing past her like thunder wrapped in grace. When she returned home that evening, Emma opened the window, letting the city breeze fill the room. Olivia sat at the table, doing homework, legs swinging off the chair. Emma smiled, walked over, and wrapped her arms around her. Olivia looked up. "What's this for?" "Because one day, you'll understand what it means to be seen. And I want you to remember what that looks like." Outside, the city buzzed, but inside their apartment, peace had planted its roots, and the fire beneath Emma's feet no longer burned her. It lit her path. The gala lights poured out of the Crownville ballroom like rivers of glass and gold. Strings hummed softly overhead as guests in suits and gowns glided across marble floors, laughing into champagne glasses and whispering the names of people they'd never meet. A grand chandelier hung in the center, casting sharp light on everything beneath it. But all eyes shifted when she walked in. Emma stood at the threshold in a sky-blue dress, not expensive, not tailored by a name the room would know. But it was hers, simple, elegant, shaped with care by hands in her neighborhood who believed in her. Her natural curls framed her face, and she wore no jewelry but the quiet strength in her eyes. Conversations paused. Some guests stared with confusion, others with recognition, a few with admiration. No one dared speak out loud, but the silence said everything. She stepped forward with steady grace, her chin held high. Ethan was already waiting at the end of the red-carpeted hallway, wearing a black suit with no tie and a gaze that never left her. "You look like something this city's never seen before," he said softly. Emma smiled, almost shyly. "You're just saying that?" "No," he replied. "I'm just the first one with the courage to say what everyone else is thinking." She glanced around. "This feels unreal. You've earned every second of it." Inside the ballroom, the hotel's director tapped a microphone. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor 20 years of excellence, but more importantly, we honor the spirit that has carried us forward when things got hard. There's one person who has quietly lifted the soul of this place without ever asking for applause." He looked directly at Emma. "Miss Emma Davis, will you join us?" Her breath caught. Ethan touched her hand gently and she walked toward the stage. The spotlight followed. She stood before the microphone, surrounded by silence thick with expectation. "1 year ago," she began, voice low but steady, "I was just a girl walking to work with mud on my coat and worn-out shoes." Some guests shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't stand here because someone gave me a favor. I stand here because someone believed in me when the world didn't know my name. Because when the world splashed dirt on me, I didn't stop walking." Her eyes swept the room. "I kept showing up, not to impress but to survive, and somehow that survival turned into something more." Her voice trembled just once. "I'm not special because of what I do. I'm just proof of what happens when someone like me gets seen, really seen. Not as a burden, not as a background character, but as a human being with dignity." A hush fell, then a single clap, then another, until the room stood. Even those who never spoke her name before were now on their feet. Back in the shadows of the room, Vanessa leaned against a column, drink untouched. Her face was still unreadable, but her father stood beside her. "She's everything you're afraid of," he said without looking at her. Vanessa turned. "And what's that supposed to mean?" He exhaled deeply. She didn't need wealth to be powerful or cruelty to be respected. "She got lucky," Vanessa muttered. "No," he said. "She got noticed, and that's something you never learned how to earn. Outside on the rooftop terrace later that night, Emma stood by the railing, letting the breeze wrap around her. The city sparkled below, loud and distant. Ethan joined her quietly, offering her a glass of sparkling cider. "You took their breath away tonight," he said. "I only told the truth. That's the rarest thing in this building." She looked at him. "I was never trying to become anything big." "You didn't become anything," he replied. "You revealed what was always there." She smiled at that, then looked out across the city again. "I used to think people like me were invisible, that no one wanted to hear our stories unless they came with pain or pity. And now, she said, I know we were never invisible. We were just never in the room long enough to be heard." Ethan stepped closer. "You changed the room, Emma, and it'll never be the same." In the corner of the ballroom near the champagne bar, a reporter scribbled notes. Not on Vanessa's new bag, not on the hotel's decor, but on Emma. The girl who had once stood in the rain, covered in mud, and never once asked for attention. The whispers had stopped. Now the world was listening. The morning after the gala, Emma stepped out into the chill air with a quiet clarity in her chest. Her name was no longer whispered behind hands. It was spoken aloud, attached to words like resilience, grace, strength. She should have felt unstoppable, but the world has a way of testing those who rise. Later that afternoon, while clearing out fresh linens from the upper floors, she overheard a murmur between two junior managers in the hallway. "She won't last," one said under his breath. "It's a Cinderella phase. People like her fade when the attention does." Emma didn't pause, didn't let her hands tremble. She just adjusted the linens in her arms and kept walking. But inside her, a familiar ache returned, the ache of being underestimated. Again. Back in the break room, Tina leaned against the vending machine, sipping coffee. Her eyes followed Emma as she entered. The room fell into a hush. Emma moved with grace, but her silence carried weight. "You think you've changed everything, don't you?" Tina said flatly. Emma met her gaze. "No, but I changed enough for myself." Tina stepped forward. "You didn't earn this, Emma. You got lucky. One rich man watches you mop floors, and suddenly the world thinks you're special." Emma didn't flinch. "You think what he gave me made me, but what you don't see is that I was already rising long before he showed up. You were just too busy looking down to notice." For a moment the room stood still. Tina's jaw clenched. Then she turned and walked out, her silence louder than her words. That evening, Emma arrived home to find Olivia waiting on the couch, legs swinging, a large envelope in her lap. "This came today," she said. Emma sat beside her and opened it. Inside was an invitation. A city-wide women's leadership panel had asked her to speak, not as a token, but as an example, a woman who had overcome, a voice that represented hundreds who never got the mic. "I'm scared," Emma admitted softly. Olivia leaned on her shoulder. "But you're ready." The next day, across the city, Vanessa scrolled through her feed and watched a clip from the gala. Emma on stage. Ethan in the background, looking at her the way Vanessa had always wanted someone to look at her, with pride, not possession. Her lips tightened. The silence in her condo was suffocating. The phone calls had stopped. The partnerships were drying up. And still Emma kept rising. Vanessa stood at the window, her voice low. "She's not better than me." But somewhere inside her, a truth had begun to take root. Maybe she was. Days later, the event hall buzzed with excitement as women of all backgrounds gathered for the panel. CEOs, artists, students, mothers. And in the center, Emma sat in a simple black blouse, no designer name on her shoulder, only calm determination in her eyes. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the podium, fingers curled slightly around the edge. "I'm not here because I was the best. I'm here because I kept going when no one clapped. I'm here because I didn't let being unseen stop me from walking forward. She paused. Where I'm from, we don't get platforms like this. We clean the floors of places like this. And that's the problem. Because strength isn't reserved for those with titles. It lives in those who carry silence and keep moving. The room erupted, not in noise but in stillness, a sacred quiet. And then applause like thunder. Backstage, Ethan waited. When she stepped behind the curtain, he held out a bottle of water. "You keep shaking the ground," he said. "I just told the truth." He smiled. That's what groundbreakers do. Later that night, they walked home in the quiet, Olivia between them holding both their hands. The city around them moved fast, but their steps were slow, steady, unshaken. As they reached their door, Olivia looked up. "Emmy, does this mean we're done with the hard stuff?" Emma knelt down to her level. "No, baby, it means we're strong enough for whatever comes next. Because even when the world tries to break you twice, some roots go too deep to be moved. And some women, once they've stood in the fire, never bow again." The sun spilled gold over the polished tiles of the hotel lobby as Emma walked through the front entrance. Not in uniform this time, but in a crisp cream blouse and slacks that fit like confidence. Her badge now read Assistant Guest Experience Manager. The title meant more than a position. It was proof of effort, of patience, of worth that no longer had to whisper to be heard, but not everyone was clapping. Vanessa stood just steps from the elevator, arms crossed, sunglasses still on though they were indoors. She watched Emma walk by, her voice sharp like glass. "Well, well, the queen arrives." Emma turned slowly, eyes calm. "I'm not a queen. Just someone who showed up every day." Vanessa pulled off her glasses. "You think all of this is because you worked harder than everyone else." "I don't think, I know," Emma replied. "Because no one handed me anything, not the shifts. Not the respect, not the storms I walked through." Vanessa scoffed. "You got lucky, one man with power, that's all it took." Emma's voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "No, one man didn't give me power, he just refused to look away. That's not luck, that's humanity." The elevator doors opened behind her. She stepped in without another word. That afternoon, Ethan hosted a private leadership training in one of the Sky lounges. Emma stood beside him, introducing speakers, organizing folders, greeting each guest with a warmth that didn't beg for attention, but drew it anyway. Every time she spoke, the room paused, not for beauty, but for presence. After the final session ended, Ethan leaned close to her as they packed materials. "You know you could lead these yourself next year." Emma smiled without turning. "I'm still learning." He tilted his head. "Exactly. That's what makes you worthy of leading." Later that evening, as the sun slipped behind the skyline, Vanessa sat at a corner booth in a dim restaurant, staring down at her untouched plate. Her father joined her, placing his phone on the table face down. "I saw your face today," he said. "You're still chasing something that doesn't exist." Vanessa didn't respond. He leaned forward. "You want applause without impact, image without integrity. But you can't stand beside people like Emma and expect to shine if your light only works when no one else is glowing." Her voice came low. "She humiliated me." "No," he corrected. "She didn't even mention your name. That's what really bothers you." A pause. "She became everything you pretended to be, and she did it by being real." Back at the hotel, Emma finished a late-night walkthrough with security. Her steps were quiet, steady. As she passed by the floor where it all began, the corridor where she was once scolded, ignored, soaked in mud, she paused. The marble floor was spotless. The air was still. One of the junior housekeepers glanced at her nervously. "Ma'am, are we clear on this floor?" Emma smiled softly. Yes, it's perfect, thank you for caring. He nodded, visibly surprised at her gentleness. As Emma turned to leave, she caught her own reflection in the glass. Not the girl who once stood shaking with a mop in hand. This woman stood tall, not proud, just steady, like someone who had learned how to be whole even while broken. She walked past the front desk and out into the night air. Outside, Ethan waited by the hotel entrance, hands in his coat pocket. He looked at her, eyes full of quiet knowing. "You good?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I've ever been." They walked side by side into the city light. From a balcony above, Vanessa watched them disappear into the night. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, flawed, uncertain human. For the first time, she didn't reach for her phone. She just stood there. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't thinking about revenge. Maybe she was thinking about who she might become if she stopped looking down on others long enough to face her own truth. Because even villains can change, if they're brave enough to look in the mirror. Rain whispered down over the streets of Crownville like a hush laid over the city. The pavement shimmered under street lamps, slick and dark, just like it had that morning long ago. The same corner, the same puddle. But this time, Emma stood in the rain by choice. Her hair was tied back, her heels in one hand, bare feet grounded on the same stretch of sidewalk where it all began. Ethan watched her from a few steps away, holding a small black umbrella above both of them. "You sure you want to do this barefoot?" he asked, voice low. Emma nodded. "It's not about the water, it's about memory." She stepped slowly into the center of the street, where the puddle once splashed her. The echo of that cold morning, the laughter from the tinted window, the sting of mud against her skin, it all came rushing back. But this time she wasn't trembling. She was reclaiming. "This," she whispered, "is where I stopped being invisible." She crouched down and touched the edge of the wet pavement, then stood again. "And I didn't even know it yet." Ethan looked at her with quiet pride. Sometimes the dirt they throw is exactly what helps you grow. They stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence say what words couldn't. The world moved on around them, cars passing, lives rushing. But in that moment, time bent back to heal what had once been fractured. The next morning, Emma arrived at the hotel to find the staff gathered in the lobby. Not just the cleaners or the managers, but everyone, from the front desk to the executive offices. Mr. Clark stood at the center holding a framed photo. It was of Emma, caught mid-smile, mop in hand, back when she was just beginning. Someone had written beneath it in bold letters, "Grace changes everything." "We voted," Mr. Clark said. "And starting next month, we'll be launching the Emma Davis Training Fellowship, a mentorship program for frontline workers who dream of leadership." Gasps filled the lobby. Emma stepped back, eyes wide. "You're naming it after me," she said quietly. "Emma," Clark said, for once without a clipboard, "you taught us all that dignity doesn't wait for position. It walks in every day and gets to work." There were tears in her eyes, but she held her voice steady. "I accept, not for me, but for every girl in dirty shoes who thinks no one sees her." That afternoon, Emma stood before a room of new hires. Men and women in faded uniforms, nervous eyes, and worn-out souls. She didn't speak from a podium. She sat among them, speaking with them. "I used to think silence was survival," she said. "Now I know your voice is your armor." Hands rose, stories flowed, something shifted. That night, Ethan cooked dinner in Emma's small kitchen. Olivia danced barefoot on the tile, music floating from a nearby speaker. The lights were soft, the laughter real. No gala gowns, no marble walls. Just a family built not by luck, but by choice. After the dishes were cleared and Olivia had fallen asleep on the couch, Emma leaned against the windowsill. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. Ethan walked over, sliding beside her. I didn't think, he said. I hoped. She looked at him. You saved me. He shook his head gently. No, I just saw you. You did the rest. They stood in silence, staring out over the city that once ignored her. Now it whispered her name with reverence. And just below their window, the street glistened again, same rain, same road, but no more mud, only reflection, only light. The sun was dipping low over the south side of Crownville, casting a golden wash over cracked sidewalks and rust-colored rooftops. Emma stepped off the number 11 bus, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. In her hand, she carried a cloth tote with a photo frame, a leather notebook, and a few worn books that had changed her life. She wasn't here for show. She was here for something real, something full circle. This was the neighborhood that taught her grit before grace. The place where no one asked your dreams, only your shift time. But tonight she was back, not to prove anything, just to give back what she'd once needed: belief. The community center was packed, not fancy, not sleek, just rows of folding chairs, warm smiles, and a small mic up front. The walls still had the same faded paint she remembered, but the energy had shifted. She could feel it. In the front row sat Olivia, legs swinging, wearing a new backpack and a proud grin that lit up the whole room. Emma took the stage with no pretense, no teleprompter, just her story. She looked out at the crowd, students in oversized hoodies, mothers in scrubs, tired eyes looking for hope. I don't have a title to give you, she began, her voice soft but steady. I don't come from legacy. I come from long nights, short paychecks, and moments when I wondered if I mattered. But I'm standing here today to tell you this: worth isn't something they give you. It's something you already have. A little girl raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 9, braids falling over her shoulders. Did you ever feel like you weren't good enough? Emma paused, looked right at her. Every single day, she said, but I learned something powerful. Just because the world doesn't see your light doesn't mean you stop shining. You don't need permission to be valuable. There was a stillness in the room, the kind that comes not from silence but from recognition, then slow, strong applause. No one stood, but everyone understood. Afterward, an older woman approached Emma, voice trembling. Your mother would be proud. Emma smiled gently. I hope so. As they left the center that night, Emma and Olivia walked the block together, past street lamps humming low and puddles catching pieces of light. Olivia was full of chatter about her teacher, about her new science project, but then she stopped. I want to be like you one day, she said. Emma knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. No, baby, you don't need to be like me. You just need to be fully you. But you're strong, Olivia whispered. Emma tucked a braid behind Olivia's ear. And so are you. Later that night, with Olivia asleep on the couch and the city hushed outside their apartment window, Emma opened the leather notebook. On the first page she wrote, Legacy isn't about fame. It's not about applause. It's about who you lift when no one's watching. It's about how you make others feel seen. And it's about showing up, especially when it's hard. She looked over at the photo on her wall, a picture of her handing a certificate to a young woman in a janitor's uniform. Next to it, another photo, her younger self in her cleaning outfit, standing outside Crownville Hotel, soaked in rain and dignity. Both women looking forward, because real legacy doesn't live in the past. It builds the future, one hand extended at a time. Every story worth telling leaves us with more than entertainment. It leaves us with a compass. Emma's journey, from the sting of muddy humiliation to the quiet power of lifting others, offers a map for anyone who has ever felt unseen or underestimated. If you are walking to work in worn-out shoes, wondering whether the world will ever notice your effort, remember Emma on that rain-soaked curb. Dignity is not stamped by status. It is forged in the decision to keep moving even when the road is wet and the laughter stings. Hold that image close on the mornings when doubt screams loudest. If you are the friend, co-worker, or stranger who witnesses injustice, Ethan's choice is your reminder that silence is agreement. One act of courageous attention, a sandwich left quietly, a promotion pushed forward, a public defense before cameras, can tilt an entire life toward hope. When you see a system leaning on someone's back, do not look away. Bend the beams until the weight is shared. Our voices may tremble, but trembling truth still roars louder than polished cruelty. For those tempted to dismiss another person's rise as luck or favoritism, Vanessa's mirror stands waiting. Ask what scares you about someone else shining. Is it their light or the shadows it casts on your own unexamined corners? Envy will always whisper that someone else's victory is your loss. Wisdom knows that dignity, like candle flame, multiplies when shared. As citizens of a world still bruised by color lines and class walls, we hold responsibility together. When we protest a racist remark, recommend a hidden talent for a visible role, or vote for leaders who honor human rights, we widen the path Emma walked. And when we teach our children, like Olivia, to judge worth by character, not complexion, we plant seeds that outlive us. So let Emma's fellowship program remind every frontline worker that excellence can begin with a mop handle and end with a microphone. Let Tina's regret warn us that bitterness is a cage we build for ourselves. Let Vanessa's late-night reckoning prove that pride without empathy collapses under its own weight. And let Ethan's steady witness prove that allyship is not saviorism. It is partnership, shoulder to shoulder, eye to eye. If you are struggling today, carry this promise. Resilience is louder than ridicule, and history bends toward those who refuse to disappear. If you are comfortable today, carry this charge. Use your comfort as cover for the vulnerable, not a cushion for indifference. Because every time one of us speaks up, an unseen Emma somewhere lifts her head, wipes the rain from her brow, and takes another step toward the light. In the end, that is our shared legacy. Not trophies, not trending headlines, but the quiet, stubborn insistence that every human being deserves room to rise, no matter the color of their skin or the dirt on their shoes. And maybe, just maybe, Emma's story reminds us that dignity doesn't need a title to stand tall. That sometimes the strongest people are the quiet ones, showing up every day doing their best, even when no one is clapping. Let this be a soft reminder. If you've ever felt overlooked, unworthy, or tired of the fight, keep going. Your worth is not decided by someone else's opinion. And if you're someone watching injustice happen, speak up. Stand beside those who are hurting, because silence has never healed a wound. We all deserve the right to live, to grow, to be seen, no matter our skin color, job title, or background. If this story touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What part of Emma's journey spoke to you the most? And make sure to stay tuned, because in the next videos, we'll be bringing more true, powerful stories of struggle, injustice, and incredible triumphs from the Black community that will surprise and inspire you. These are the stories that the world often forgets, but here we remember them, and we tell them with love. See you in the next story.